Greetings, traveler. I'm SnapJelly, and the short swords in Oblivion. Are they realistic? Well, first I want to say something, and that is that when people talk about historical swords, or even in modern HEMA, the term short sword is not used an awful lot. If it's used, people usually use it to refer to ancient sword designs, like the gladius and the xiphas and stuff like that. But even then, people tend to just say the actual name of the sword. You know, people very rarely say ancient Roman sword, they just say gladius. Or they say something like the location or the people that use the sword. So they'll say like ancient Celtic sword or something like that. And with bronze swords, it's kind of the same thing. People usually don't say short sword, people just say bronze sword. But still though, if short sword is used, people tend to use it for ancient sword designs. However, in Oblivion, it's a completely different subcategory of sword, so we're just going to talk about it. A lot of these swords are pretty much identical to their longsword counterparts, except they're a bit shorter. Not all of them though, there are some differences, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So join me in my quest, and we are going to talk about that now. These intros get worse and worse as time goes on, really. Starting off with the iron short sword. This one is the exact same design as the longsword, which I already covered in another video, so I don't really have any more to add. There's also a rusty iron short sword and a fine iron short sword, but they both have the exact same design. Next up is the steel short sword. This design is very similar to the longsword, but with a slight difference in guard. The guard on this one seemed to be a bit longer comparatively, but it's by no means oversized, so there's really not a problem. Next up is the fine steel short sword. Now this design is a bit different. The blade is very thin, so it's primarily a thruster. And there's obviously an absolute lack of a guard, which in this case is really not much of a problem, but I'll add to that later. First, let's cover the silver short sword. In terms of functionality, this wouldn't be any different from the fine steel short sword. Next up is the glass short sword. In terms of functionality, this wouldn't be any different from the silver short sword. Next up is the Dwarven Short-Sword. In terms of functionality, this wouldn't be any different. Okay, I'm sorry. It's a bit different because it's a bit wider. It reminds me a bit of a Cinque Dea, actually. Alright, so let me cover why the lack of a guard in this case is not that much of a problem. Well, at least it doesn't have to be a problem. You see, when you look at historical examples of people using relatively short swords without a guard, it really depends on the context. Swords like these could, for example, thrive in formations. If your opponents use spears, which utilizes reach, you can use a formation, a tight formation, to try and get close to your opponent, and that is where your shorter weapon would thrive. Now, why doesn't it matter that it doesn't have a guard? Well, because if you want something like that to be successful, you will need other means of protection anyway, like a shield. The way that you can really make a weapon like this work is if you can get close. And the only real way for you to get close to your opponent is by other means of protection. So if you compare this with a shield, you can use your shield to cover yourself, get in close, and then use your shorter reach to your advantage. Another way for this to work is simply by wearing lots and lots of armor, what you see in the late Middle Ages, when fully plated armor people ended up tackling each other and fighting it out with daggers. Now there's of course a lot of variables, and this is just glancing over the top, but that's a way that you can view this. Using a shorter weapon doesn't have to be a problem if you have other means of protection, like a shield or lots of armor. A sword like this on its own is not really gonna do you any good. Next up is the Elven Short-Sword. This looks incredibly similar like the Elven swords from Lord of the Rings. What a coincidence! Honestly, I think that functionally it wouldn't really differ much from the other swords that I've covered so far. I think it's probably too short to use it, much like a shashka or any other kind of saber, so pretty much the same as what I just said would apply, I think. But honestly, that's debatable. And this thing, spike pointy thing here, I don't think that would do all that much in general. I mean, it would be annoying if there's blade contact between you and your opponent, but like I just said, shield, and that wouldn't be an issue. So, there you go. Next up is the Ebony Short-Sword. And the design is the same as the longsword again, just shorter. And there's inherently nothing wrong with it, except for that I still think that the card looks a bit weird, but nothing wrong with it. And lastly is the Daedric short-sword. And I gotta say, I actually like the way this looks. Really, I mean, it still has the spikes at the pommel problems that all the Daedric weapons seem to have. But these things at the top here, they don't really look like serration to me, more like waves, which wouldn't be an issue at all. So overall, I think it just kind of looks like a short chopper kind of weapon, and actually I like it. I don't see anything really wrong with it. And that was all of them already. That was fast. So that was it, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to know if the longswords in Oblivion are realistic, you can click the button over here. And if you want to know if the claymores are realistic, then you can click the button over there. And thank you for joining my quest, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye, guys.